Within the Zelda chronology, we find many recurring features spanning across multiple titles in the franchise, one of which being the SAGES. They seem to operate on a similar basis as Link, Zelda, and even Ganon, with elements of the divine, reincarnation, ancestry, and spirituality. However, the rules bound to the SAGES differ between games and are never consistent. With Link and Zelda, things are pretty straightforward, at least since the release of Skyward Sword, that is, since this is the first game to finally explain how it all works. As a quick recap, Zelda has the blood of the goddess Hylia running through her veins, which is passed on from generation to generation, and because of tradition within the royal family, each female born into this bloodline shall be named Zelda, hence the recurring name. So each iteration of Zelda we see in the series is in some way related by blood to the very first one from Skyward Sword, who was the first to take on the mortal form of the goddess. If this bloodline were to be broken, aka Zelda dies before she can produce offspring, the mortal reincarnation of Hylia would in all likelihood cease to exist. The main purpose of this divine inheritance comes in the form of the power to seal away evil, which in most cases is crucial to defeat Ganon. The existence of the many links across the history of the series is tied to the spirit of the hero. What this spirit is exactly is a bit hazy, but it seems to be some sort of spiritual essence that endures over time and awakens within certain individuals in a certain time period when their courage is needed. The spirit also seems to be connected in some way to the Triforce of Courage. Some are born with it, or maybe it's Maybelline, and others obtain it as their quest unfolds. As opposed to Zelda, this continuation of this line of heroes is not dependent on bloodline. In fact, we only have one confirmed case of two heroes being related by blood without a shadow of a doubt, that being the Hero of Time and the Hero of Twilight. I'm inclined to believe that the Hero of Winds and the Link from Spirit Tracks are also related since, well, just look at the similarities. But anyway, a hero infused with this spirit can come from different backgrounds and their age can vary as well. The only restrictions we've seen so far is that in all cases the subject is male and of Hylian descent. Even the existence of Ganon is pretty straightforward, as he is simply an incarnation of the hatred from the Demon King Demise, also from Skyward Sword, who upon his defeat uttered a curse that would forever plague Hyrule with an eternal struggle between the trinity of power, wisdom and courage, aka the hero, the princess and an incarnation of this evil. Ganon's continued appearance across the series is simply a physical manifestation of this curse. With the SAGES, however, it becomes real confusing real quick. So before we get into the events of the Era of the Wild, I want to go over some of the stuff we know about the SAGES so far, how their inclusion changed and in some cases even retconned by Nintendo. First off, let's start with the Ancient Sages, also known as the Original Sages. These individuals are said to be the very first of their kind, and ages ago built the Temple of Time to protect the entrance to the Sacred Realm. Additionally, they've also been attributed to having some sort of involvement in crafting the Master Sword. But as we have seen in Skyward Sword, this narrative seems to have changed, since the forging of the Master Sword by Link and Fi is literally one of the main goals in the story, and there are no sages involved, though we do find a reference to them in the Sealed Temple. Even the original Goddess Sword, which serves as the basis for the Master Sword, is said to have been crafted by Goddess Hylia. Now, it could be that instead of forging it herself, she instructed the sages to do it, but to me it seems like Nintendo simply altered the backstory, or maybe forgot about the original narrative. Of this group of ancient sages, there's only one of which we know the identity, that being Rauru, who first shows up in Ocarina of Time to lead the newly awakened sages and guide Link along his quest, both in his human form as well as his owl form, and yes, Gabora Gabora is confirmed to be the reincarnation of Rauru, however strange that may seem. The 6 beings we see in Twilight Princess, although they look completely different, are said to be the Ancient Sages, the very same who built the original Temple of Time preceding Skyward Sword. By that definition, one of them is Rauru. However, the other 5 are not necessarily the same sages we see in Ocarina of Time. Well, they kinda are, but also not really. We'll get back to that later. Traditionally, the main narrative has been that we have 6 sages of water, fire, shadow, light, forest, and spirit, plus a 7th sage which is none other than Princess Zelda herself, who, as mentioned before, is the mortal incarnation of Hylia. So 7 ethereal beings, Goddess Hylia and the 6 ancient sages. In the original version of A Link to the Past, there's mention of 7 wise men. However, this was later retconned by Nintendo and changed to 7 sages on the Game Boy Advance. For the American version, that is, because apparently they were always called 7 sages in Japanese, but was mistranslated to wise men in the English version. It is widely accepted that this change pretty much proves that the 7 sages mentioned in the backstory to A Link to the Past are indeed the very same sages from Ocarina of Time, since it seems to describe exactly that which took place during this era, where the sages seal away Ganon inside the Sacred Realm for the very first time, and thus transforming it into the Dark World we see in A Link to the Past, though in Ocarina of Time they call it the Evil Realm. Now, during the events of A Link to the Past, we have 6 maidens plus Zelda, who are descendants of the sages from Ocarina of Time, and inherited the magical abilities of their ancestors. Through the use of his alter ego, Aghanim, Ganon sends these maidens into the Dark World in an attempt to escape his prison and return to the World of Light. However, this never comes to pass as Link defeats him before he can make it happen. So in that case, we are still on the right track here, right? 6 maidens, aka sages, plus Princess Zelda. But of course we have a problem, because we can never have anything be straightforward in Zelda lore now, can we? Other games in the series have featured more sages or additional sages with new elements we've never seen before. The Wind Waker only features 2, that being the Sage of Earth and Wind. Now, it is suspected that there was originally supposed to be more of them, at the very least 3, since some dungeons were scrapped to meet a deadline. A Link Between Worlds features 7 sages, however, the 7th one isn't Princess Zelda this time. They are all said to be descendants of the original 7 sages, but that makes no sense. By that logic, one of them has to be the offspring of Zelda from A Link to the Past. The most likely candidates based on race would be Gully, the son of the local blacksmith, Osfala, who is Sahasrah's apprentice, or Ceres, the daughter of the priest at the sanctuary. So after Link left Hyrule to venture to Koholint, did Zelda hit it off with the local blacksmith at that time? But the blacksmith in A Link to the Past were dwarves, right? We also don't know who Osfala is related to. Besides, the royal princess wouldn't marry some mere peasant. It's more likely that she would marry someone close to the royal family, which, oh my God. That sneaky bastard. But even then, if Zelda had more than one kid, one being the new incarnation of Hylia, did the other kid only inherit her sage powers? Why would her powers split into 2 different people? And where did this 7th or technically 8th sage come from if there was originally only 7 entities? To make matters even more confusing, both Sahasrahla and Agina, the 2 old men found in A Link to the Past, are also descendants of the original 7 sages. I'm getting a migraine. In the older games on the NES, the numbers also vary. The guy who gives you the sword at the beginning of the game, Sage. The other 2 guys that give you the silver and magic sword, Sages. This guy from Zelda 2, Sage. In Phantom Hourglass we can find a graveyard with 6 sages who are laid to rest here, but this game takes place in the realm of the Ocean King. How can the 6 sages from Hyrule be buried here? Or are these 6 other sages from a different world altogether? It's a mess. Now, we're gonna get into Breath of the Wild too, don't worry. It's coming. But before we do, I think it would be wise if we try to at least make a little bit more sense out of this whole situation and try to determine what even a sage is exactly. The definition of the word sage is that of a person who possesses a profound wisdom, often through experience. In the Zelda series, this seems to span further than just wisdom and also part of something divine. And as we've clearly seen so far, this aspect is never consistent. Their numbers change, their purpose, their race, gender, age, etc. For this theory, I had to ask help from one of the masters of Zelda lore, Mr. HMK. Because frankly, I really needed some intel on this one, so consider this part to be a collab, without actually collaborating. It is speculated that a sage can take on 2 different appearances, an ethereal spirit form and a physical form. In order to take on a physical form, they need to be reincarnated into a physical body. One game I haven't touched upon yet, Spirit Tracks, features the Locomo. By the way, spoilers for the ending of Spirit Tracks incoming. This group, despite their different name, are basically the sages of New Hyrule, which is not the same place as the original Hyrule, mind you, as by this point in time that kingdom now lies at the bottom of the Great Sea. They might even be the very same incarnations of the ancient sages. There's a total of 7 of them at the end, and their colors seems to match that of the sages of Ocarina of Time. One of them, called Byrne, initially didn't get granted the power of a sage because his heart was not pure and he had a lust for power. Frustrated by this rejection, he turns to the dark side and together with Chancellor Cole, he conspires to free the Demon King Maladus from his prison. Long story short, Byrne redeems himself at the end, but he dies in the final confrontation with Maladus. After Maladus is defeated, the Locomo return back to the heavens, but before they do, one of them, Angine, who Byrne was an apprentice of, states that Locomo never really die, but rather they get reborn eventually without a memory of their past lives. This might explain why the number of sages and even some of their elements differ from game to game. It's never stated that the group of ancient sages consists of only 6 or 7. For all we know, there could be many more of them. However, only the ones that are relevant to the situation plaguing Hyrule are sent back to Earth to fulfill their purpose. It also explains why they keep appearing in different forms, races, and genders. They are reincarnated without any memory of their past lives, but when the time comes and their skills are needed, they awaken. Hence why the sages from Ocarina of Time, for instance, didn't know about their destiny as a sage until the time came to take action. In all probability, the ones we see in Twilight Princess are the true forms of these beings, without a physical body. Sages are in that regard immortal, however their physical forms are not. They eventually die just like any other being and reincarnate years later, which is why some people can be descendants of one of the sages but not be one themselves. They are only related to the physical being that the sage inhabited at that time. In many ways, this is very similar to the spirit of the hero. They don't need to be related by blood. They can be, but it's not a requirement. Just as a new hero can always awaken when the time comes, so does a sage. As for their purpose, it depends. In Ocarina of Time, the main purpose was to aid Link in his quest and ultimately seal Ganon inside the Sacred Realm. In Twilight Princess, they tried to execute him once and for all, but after failing to do so, sealed him into the Twilight Realm. When even this wasn't enough, the only thing they had left was to instruct the hero on his quest to strike Ganondorf down and succeed where they had failed. Well, for a while anyway. We'll get to it. In the Wind Waker, sealing away Ganondorf wasn't even an option anymore, and in this case their goal was to offer prayers to restore the Master Sword's power to repel evil after the original 2 sages were assassinated by Ganondorf. In other games, the sages are guarding the Triforce of Courage. It really does seem that whatever divine task is required at a time of peril, they will act upon that which needs to be done, and the nature of this task can differ. Which finally brings us to Breath of the Wild and its upcoming sequel. In the battle against Calamity Ganon, we had the 5 champions, which are by no means the same thing as a sage. They do have their own unique powers and abilities, but as we know from past games, having access to magic isn't restricted to divine beings alone, as we see many others using it as well. The champions are simply skilled individuals who, with the exception of Link himself, are tasked to pilot the divine beast to subdue Ganon enough so that Link can deliver the decisive blow with the Sword of Evil's Bane, and Zelda use her divine power to seal it away. However, as we all know now, Calamity Ganon was just a puppet. All Zelda is doing is basically send a piece of malice into the void. The real threat lies somewhere deep underground. We didn't see any involvement of the sages in this decisive battle, nor are they mentioned in the battle of 10,000 years ago. But this isn't to say that the sages weren't referenced in the Era of the Wild. 2 sages from Ocarina of Time, Ruto and Nabooru, are mentioned by name. The 4 divine beasts are named after sages from different games. Vamado after Medli, Varudania after Darunia, Faruta after Rudo, and Vanaboris after Nabooru. Then we have the 7 heroine statues, which are confirmed to be a memorial to the 7 sages, and an additional 8th statue in the Gerudo Highlands. The Lord of the Mountain, found on Satori Mountain, is said to be the reincarnation of a sage that died on the lands it now protects. And then there's one other reference, a big one. However, this one is not found in the base game, but rather in DLC Pack 1, more specifically the Trial of the Sword. The whole purpose of the trial is to unlock the Master Sword's true potential by battling your way through different stages of combat challenges. At the very end, we find the Master Sword in a pedestal with 7 Sheikah monks surrounding it. 6 of them strike the same pose as the 6 sages from Ocarina of Time did when they sealed away Ganon. Now, does this confirm that these monks are the incarnations of the sages in the Era of the Wild? Unfortunately, no. This could of course just be a reference or an Easter egg. It is quite striking though that the monks seem to offer prayers to power up the Master Sword, just like they did in the Wind Waker. This ritual seems to lack the element of music though, unless the monks were having a sing-along right before Link walked in. There's nothing that 100 men or more could ever do. I bless the rains down in But hey, at the same time, Nintendo is known to change certain rituals, so it doesn't disprove this theory either. The monks do disappear after Link obtains the fully powered Master Sword, so if these were in fact the incarnations of the 7 sages, that would mean that they are now gone. If you ask me, I'm not so sure if the sages will even have to make a return in the sequel. It is made clear that Zelda's sealing power has greatly diminished after the endgame in Breath of the Wild, but maybe sealing away Ganondorf, again, will not be the final goal here, but rather, similar to Twilight Princess, straight up killing him instead. We know that sealing him away doesn't really do much other than delay his inevitable return. And as has been mentioned by other channels like Commonwealth Realm, perhaps the only way to finally defeat Ganondorf once and for all is to break the curse of demise. How this can be achieved is beyond me at this point, but there is a very good chance that the sages are no longer needed like they were in past games. So there you go, a 15-minute video for a relatively short and concise answer. To be honest, this video was supposed to be a short and simple one. I could have simply dived straight into the Breath of the Wild 2 stuff, but first of all, there wasn't really enough to talk or speculate about, and second, I wanted to give more context, show you guys how confusing the aspect of the sages has been throughout the series and how this all might tie together with the events of the next game. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks again for all the support. Speaking of support, we have a new Patreon today. Say hello to Adam Hughes. Thanks a lot for joining, man, it really means a lot. Next week is gonna be a pretty crazy and ambitious video, which I won't spoil for now. Except that it's about Breath of the Wild. Big shock, I know. I hope to see you then. This is Don signing off, and have a good one.